The air in Okinawa in late June 1945 was not air. It was a thick, wet blanket woven from pulverized coral, the stench of death, salt, and human misery. The monsoon rains had turned the landscape into a slurry of mud and ash, clinging to the boots of Private First Class Jack Brooklyn O'Malley as he patrolled the perimeter of the civilian internment camp at Tengan. The battle was officially over. General Roy Geiger, who had taken command of the 10th Army after General Buckner's death just days before the island fell, had declared victory. But for O'Malley, victory looked a lot like hell, just with more paperwork. His M1 rifle felt heavier each day, less a tool of war and more a glorified stick to herd the dazed skeletal figures that shuffled into the camp by the thousand. O'Malley was 19. He had landed at Hagushi Beach thinking of John Wayne. Now he thought of nothing but a dry pair of socks and a world that didn't smell like decay. He stopped at the wire, looking in. The stockade was a sea of gray, ragged kimonos and patched-together rags. The sounds were a constant, low-level Kina symphony of grief, hunger, and terror. U.S. propaganda leaflets had promised humane treatment, but the civilians, particularly the women, had been told a different story by the Imperial Japanese Army. They had been told the blue-eyed devils would rape and butcher them. O'Malley had seen the tragic results of that propaganda on the cliffs of Mabuni, where entire families had leapt to their deaths. His eyes fell on a new arrival, a young woman, perhaps his own age, being shoved forward in a processing line. Her name, though he would not know it for weeks, was Hanako Tanaka. She was not a soldier. She was a student from Shuri, whose world had evaporated in a cloud of naval gunfire and flamethrowers. She clutched a small, tightly wrapped bundle to her chest. Her eyes, wide and black, scanned the American guards with a terror so profound it was almost silent. She was reciting a Buddhist prayer her grandmother had taught her, her lips barely moving. Esa shikisoku zeku kusoku ze shiki. Form is emptiness, emptiness is form. But the fear was not empty, it was solid, choking her. PFC O'Malley watched her. He saw the way she protected that small bundle, as if it were the last anchor in a drowning world. He'd seen GIs do the same with letters from home, or a Zippo lighter from a dead body. The thought was a small, uncomfortable spark in his exhausted mind. Inside the camp's medical tent, Nurse Clara Goldstein, a U.S. Army nurse from Minnesota, slammed down a metal clipboard. "We need more lye. We need more DDT. We need more everything." She snapped at a young corpsman, who wisely nodded and vanished. Clara was fighting a different war, a war against dysentery, typhus, and septicemia. She opened her diary, a small sweat-stained ledger, and scribbled, her handwriting sharp with anger and fatigue. June 26, 1945. Tengan Stockade. We are now responsible for over 15,000 civilians in this sector alone. Admiral Nimitz may be planning the invasion of the mainland, but here, on the ground, we are drowning in a humanitarian crisis he cannot imagine. The women and children, they are covered in lice, head lice, body lice. It's a typhus explosion waiting to happen. The order came down from command this morning, mandatory delousing. We have to shave their heads, every last one. They will see it as a violation, another act of barbarism from us. But how do you explain sanitation to someone who believes you are a monster? The processing line moved. Hanako was directed towards a large tent, the sanitation tent. A group of corpsmen and nurses stood outside, holding clippers and buckets. A low, terrified wail erupted from the women being pushed inside. O'Malley, stationed 50 yards away, turned his back. He didn't want to see this. He was a soldier, not whatever this was. Hanako saw the shears. She saw a pile of black hair on the muddy ground. The women ahead of her were being held down, their beautiful long hair shorn off in rough, quick strokes. It was a humiliation worse than being naked. In her culture, a woman's hair was her pride. To have it taken this way by these giant, hairy men, it was a violation. She clutched her small bundle, a last photo of her family, a few grains of rice in a silk pouch, and a small, sharp piece of shrapnel she had picked up near her ruined home, a token of the world that had ended. O'Malley turned back, drawn by a new pitch in the crying. He saw Hanako resisting not with strength, but with a desperate, frozen stillness. A burly corpsman grabbed her arm. O'Malley took an involuntary step forward, his boots sucking in the mud. He had orders. He was a guard. He was supposed to be numb to this. But in this ocean of shattered lives, could two people from worlds that were actively trying to annihilate each other see the human being on the other side? Hanako's eyes met his across the mud. It was not a plea. It was a silent, burning question. And as the corpseman's hand reached for her hair, O'Malley felt the war shift, shrinking from a global conflict to the few agonizing yards of mud that separated him from the girl. The first loop of an unseen, unbreakable knot was being tied. The corpsman, a man named Steiner, with thick forearms and an expression of profound boredom, did not see a woman. He saw a vector for disease. He saw task 14B, delousing. He grabbed Hanako's shoulder. She flinched, her body going rigid, but she did not scream. The other women wailed around her, a chorus of violation, but Hanako's terror was a vacuum, sucking all sound inward. PFC O'Malley watched, his knuckles white on the stock of his M1. He was rooted to the spot by a complex paralysis, military discipline, profound awkwardness, and a sickening sense of participation. He was the cage-keeper, watching the handlers shear the animals. "Hold still, sister," Steiner muttered, as if she could understand. He grabbed her hair, a thick black cascade that fell to her waist, oily and matted from weeks in hiding. He wrapped his hand in it and pulled her head back. Hanako's eyes squeezed shut. The steel of the clippers was cold against her scalp. It was not a precise or gentle tool. It was a sheep shear, powered by a coughing generator. The sound was a low, mechanical growl, and then the zip as the teeth bit. O'Malley looked away, his stomach turning. He focused on a rust-colored stain on the mud. He heard the metallic snick-snick of handshears finishing the job. When he looked back, it was done. Hanako was on her knees. Her head, now stubbled and pale, was exposed to the humid air. She looked alien, a child, a skull. Tears streamed silently down her face, cutting clean paths through the grime. She was not crying from the loss of her hair. She was crying because the last piece of her identity had been taken by a machine. She was no longer Hanako Tanaka, the student from Shuri. She was a number, a shaved head, a Horyo, a prisoner. Was this sanitation, or was it the first step in erasing who they were? The corpsman roughly dusted her head with white DDT powder, the cloud making her cough. He shoved her toward the next station. As she stumbled, the small, precious bundle she had clutched to her chest fell from her grasp, spilling its contents into the filth. A folded photograph, a few grains of dark rice, and the small, jagged piece of shrapnel. Hanako let out a small, strangled gasp and lunged for it, but Steiner kicked it away. "No contraband. Move along." "Hey!" O'Malley's voice was a croak. He hadn't meant to speak. Steiner turned, annoyed. "What, Brooklyn?" O'Malley walked forward, breaking protocol. He felt the eyes of the other guards on him. He bent down and picked up the items, his gloves smearing mud on the photograph. He saw the faces of a smiling older couple and a younger boy. He scooped up the piece of metal, sharp enough to cut. He looked at Steiner. "It's just junk. Let her have her junk." He stepped in front of Hanako, who cowered, expecting a blow. He pushed the items, mud and all, back into her hands. He was clumsy. His hands were too big, his movements too stark. He couldn't meet her eyes. He just muttered, "Go on, Ike." Hanako stared at his gloved hand, then at his face. He was not a blue-eyed devil. He was something else, confusing. She snatched the items and fled into the teeming mass of the stockade. O'Malley went back to his post, his heart hammering, feeling the heat of Steiner's glare. From the diary of Nurse Clara Goldstein. July 1, 1945. The processing is complete. The camp looks like a colony of ghosts, all these women and children with their shaved heads and gray kimonos. The typhus vector is, for now, under control, but we've traded one problem for another. The psychological toll is palpable. They don't look at us. They look through us. General Geiger's proclamation insists on humane treatment, but the logistics are a nightmare. Rations are a source of constant tension. We give them C rations and K rations. They don't know what the processed cheese is. They try to boil the chocolate bars, thinking they are some kind of root. Many have severe malnutrition. Their systems can't handle the rich food, and the dysentery wards are overflowing. But the silence is what gets me. The Japanese Imperial Army fought to the last man. But these civilians, they are an ocean of silent trauma, and we, their saviors, are the ones who just inflicted the first new trauma. Days bled into a week. The routine of the camp became a grim, monotonous rhythm. O'Malley's patrols became a strange, silent dance. He found himself timing his rounds to pass the section of the camp where Hanako had settled with a small group of other women. He never spoke to her, he just watched. He saw her share her meager ration with an older woman. He saw her meticulously cleaning the mud off the photograph he had retrieved. He started leaving things. A stray can of peaches, fallen from a crate near the wire. A bar of soap. He told himself it was just basic decency, but he knew it was something more. It was an apology, an attempt to scrub the image of the Clippers from his mind. One evening the air was thick and still, promising another monsoon. O'Malley was on a late patrol, moving through the shadows near the medical tent. The camp was quiet, a few small fires smoking under lean-tos. "Soldier-san." The voice was a whisper, barely audible. He froze, spinning, his M1 coming up halfway. Hanako was there, half hidden by a canvas flap. Her face was pale in the moonlight, her shorn hair giving her the look of a frightened boy. She looked terrified of him, and of what she was about to do. "You—" "No," O'Malley whispered, motioning for her to get back. Contact was forbidden. A GI seen talking to a prisoner, especially a female one, would be on a barge to the stockade himself. She stepped out. Her eyes were wide, fever-bright. She was holding her side, and her breath came in shallow, pained gasps. "No, dame, go back," O basically hissed. She shook her head, a violent, desperate motion. She took a stumbling step closer. The cultural barrier was a 1,000-foot wall. She, a proper Japanese woman, was approaching an enemy male. He, an American soldier, was alone with a Jap prisoner. Every instinct screamed danger. She spoke, her voice shaking, using the few English words she had been forced to learn. "Please." She held up one hand, a gesture of peace. With the other she pointed to her own abdomen, just below her ribs. "Please. Touch. Here." O'Malley's blood ran cold. The request was so bizarre, so loaded, so impossible, it stopped his thoughts. His mind, conditioned by the crude jokes of the barracks, flashed to a dozen horrifying interpretations. Was this a trick, a test, a desperate, insane plea? In a world where touch was violence, what did this desperate plea truly mean? "What?" he said, his voice hard with confusion. Hanako winced, a tear of pure agony leaking from her eye. She saw his frozen, hostile confusion. She thought he didn't understand. Desperate, she reached out and grabbed his hand, the one not holding the rifle. Her hand was burning hot. She tried to pull his hand to her own stomach, forcing his fingers onto the spot. "Here," she gasped. "Please." Itai, pain. O'Malley felt it then. Through the thin, ragged cotton of her shift, his fingers brushed against something that shouldn't be there. It wasn't soft flesh. It was a hard, agonizingly tight mass beneath her skin. It was hot, like a coal. He ripped his hand back as if he'd been burned. He finally understood. This wasn't a solicitation. This was a medical emergency. He looked at her face, now gray with pain, and saw the truth. The piece of shrapnel he'd picked up from the mud wasn't her only souvenir from the battle. She had another one, and it was still inside her. "Clara," he roared, spinning towards the medical tent. "Goldstein, get out here, now." Clara Goldstein burst out of the medical tent, a .45 pistol on her hip and a look of fury on her face. "O'Malley, what in God's name do you think you're doing? You want to start a riot. She stopped. O'Malley was no longer a guard. He was a terrified 19-year-old, his M1 hanging uselessly at his side. He just pointed at the girl, who was now slumped against him, barely conscious. "She's sick, ma'am. Real sick," he stammered. She showed me. Here." Clara's fury evaporated, replaced by the cold, efficient mask of a triage nurse. She knelt in the mud, ignoring the forbidden contact. "Corpman," she yelled over her shoulder, not waiting for a reply. "Stretch her. Now." She ran her practiced, gentle fingers over Hanako's abdomen. Hanako cried out, a thin, weak sound. Clara's fingers probed the spot. Rigid, hot, distended. She looked up at O'Malley, her eyes narrow in the dim light. "How long has she been like this?" I don't know, O'Malley said, feeling stupid. I just saw her. Well, you just bought yourself a job, PFC. 2 corpsmen ran up with a canvas stretcher, helped them get her inside, gently, gently. The move to the medical tent was a blur of shadows and stifled terror. As they carried her, the other prisoners in Hanako's hovel watched with wide, dark eyes. They weren't seeing a rescue, they were seeing an abduction. A whisper passed through the shadows. Was she being taken to be punished for speaking to the guard? They placed her on a cot in the surgery section of the tent, separated from the dysentery ward by a hanging blanket. The air was thick with the smell of carbolic acid, kerosene, and a faint, sweet, rotting odor that Clara called the enemy. Hanako was delirious, her head moving back and forth on the rubber sheet, her lips chanting in Japanese. Clara ripped open Hanako's kimono. The sight underneath made O'Malley recoil. The hard mass was a grotesque, purplish swelling on her right side. In the center was a tiny, puckered hole, oozing a thin, dark fluid. It was a puncture wound, weeks old, and it was septic. My God, Clara breathed. She grabbed a pair of forceps. O'Malley, hold her shoulders. She's going to fight. What is it? It's shrapnel. A fragment. It's been in there since the shelling. It's walled off, but it's abscessed. She's dying, O'Malley, right now, from the inside out. Clara probed the wound. Hanako screamed a raw, animal sound that cut through the tent, and her body arched off the cot. O'Malley grabbed her, his hands clumsy on her small, bony shoulders. It's okay, he whispered, the words meaningless. She was a furnace, burning with fever. I have to open it, Clara said, her voice flat. I have to drain the poison and get that metal out. She looked at her instrument tray, a few scalpels in a tray of alcohol, some sutures, and a bottle of ether. This is going to be a butcher shop. She turned to O'Malley. Hold her. Don't let her move. You're doing it? Here? Now? In 10 minutes she'll be in septic shock. In an hour she'll be dead. You got a better idea? Clara soaked a wad of gauze with ether and placed it in a cone. As she brought it toward Hanako's face, Hanako's eyes flew open. She saw the American nurse, the demon, bringing a mask to her face. She saw the soldier, the one who had retrieved her photo, holding her down. She screamed. She thrashed with a sudden violent strength, her small hands clawing at O'Malley's arms. No, Aya, Korosareru. No, I'll be killed. Hold her, damn it, Clara yelled, pressing the mask down. I'm trying, O'Malley yelled back, his heart shattering. He was pinning down a terrified woman while she was being suffocated. He saw his own sister fighting off a bee, terrified. He looked down at Hanako's face, inches from his, her eyes wide with a pure primal terror of him. This was the moment she had been warned about. The monster was finally showing his true face. Hanako-san, he said, his voice cracking. It's okay, daijobu, medical, nurse, doctor. He used the few words he knew, fragments of a hopeless bridge. The fight went out of her as the ether took hold, her body going limp. The only sound was the generator's cough and the frantic pounding in O'Malley's chest. Clara worked fast, her hands a blur. She sliced into the swollen, dark flesh. The smell hit O'Malley like a physical blow, a wave of putrescence so foul he gagged and turned his head. Clara didn't flinch. Sponge, now. She was shoulder deep in the wound. It's deep, right up against the peritoneum. If it perforated, God, she's lucky. Or was. She grunted, probing. There, I've got it. There was a wet, grating click. Clara pulled, and with a sickening pop, she extracted a 2-inch jagged triangle of black pitted steel. She dropped it into a metal kidney dish, where it clanged. There's your devil, she said, breathing heavily. She immediately began irrigating the wound with saline, then packing it with sulfur powder. She's not out of the woods. She's not even in the woods. She's in the ocean. This infection is systemic. She needs penicillin, a lot of it. She looked at her supply cabinet. And I have exactly 1 ampule left. It's reserved for Captain Davies. O'Malley looked at the fragment in the dish. It was instantly recognizable. It wasn't the thin, tinny metal of a Japanese grenade. It was thick, beveled, high-grade American steel, part of a 5-inch shell from a U.S. destroyer. His side had done this. She needs the medicine, Clara, O'Malley said, his voice low. I know, Clara snapped, her exhaustion returning. "But I can't. My orders from General Geiger's staff are clear. U.S. personnel first. I give this girl the captain's penicillin, and he gets pneumonia. I'm court-martialed, and he's dead. So you're just gonna let her die after this?" "I don't let anyone do anything, PFC," she shot back. "I'm just one woman with a box of Band-Aids fighting a war. I don't have the supply. It's locked in the main depot, and it's guarded like the gold at Fort Knox." O'Malley stared at the piece of shrapnel. It was their shell. His shell. He had held her down. He had been the monster. He looked at Clara, then at the sleeping girl, her face a pale, waxy yellow. How far would one soldier go to save an enemy he was supposed to hate? He picked up the bloody kidney dish. "You said the main depot?" Clara's eyes widened. "O'Malley, don't. That's Specialist Miller over there. He counts every single pill. You'll be caught before you get 10 feet. "Specialist Miller owes me," O'Malley said, his voice a flat, cold tone she'd never heard. "He lost $50 to me in poker last week." He tucked the dish with the shrapnel under his arm. "What are you doing with that?" "A souvenir," he said, walking to the tent flap. "To remind Miller who's paying for the medicine." He slipped out into the pre-dawn dark, a man on an impossible mission. He was no longer just a guard. He was a conspirator. He was a thief. And as he passed the command tent, he saw a shadow in the window. Captain Davies, his CO, was awake, and he was watching. The shrapnel was American, but would the truth save anyone, or just condemn them all? The night was a void, the air saturated with the humid chill that comes before dawn. PFC O'Malley moved through the camp, but he wasn't on patrol. He was a shadow, a ghost on a mission, the small cold glass ampule clutched in his fist. Every flicker of a distant light, every cough from a guard post, felt like a searchlight aimed directly at his soul. He was committing a crime. He was stealing U.S. Army property, the most valuable property on this entire godforsaken island, to give to an enemy. He reached the supply depot, a massive canvas tent smelling of damp canvas, machine oil, and tinned cheese. Specialist Miller, a pale man from Ohio who wore spectacles, was doing inventory by lantern light. "Miller," O'Malley said, emerging from the gloom. Miller yelped, dropping a crate of matches. "Brooklyn, you scared the life out of me. What do you want? It's 0400. "I'm calling in that poker debt," O'Malley said, his voice flat. Miller laughed, a short, nervous bark. "You want smokes? A can of peaches? Come on, Jack, I'm busy." O'Malley opened his hand. He didn't show the ampule. He showed the kidney dish from the medical tent. Resting in the congealed dark fluid was the 2-inch piece of American shrapnel. Miller's smile vanished. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, what the hell is that?" "It's from a girl." "A civilian," O'Malley said. "Clara Goldstein just dug it out of her. It's septic. She's dying." "So, they're all dying," Miller said, but his eyes were fixed on the bloody steel. "This one's not," O'Malley said. "She needs penicillin." "One shot. I know you've got the reserve for the command staff." Miller's face went from pale to chalk white. He stepped back, physically recoiling. "Are you insane? That's not medicine, Brooklyn. That's a controlled asset. It's Captain Davies' personal reserve. It's for General Geiger if he visits. It's not for them. I sign for every single unit. If I give that to you, we're both in the stockade at Leavenworth before the week is out. Aiding the enemy. Treason." "It's ours," O'Malley hissed, shoving the dish closer. Miller flinched. "Look at it. It's a U.S. Navy shell fragment. We put it in her. Are we just gonna let her rot from it?" This was the moral calculus, the unwritten equation. Miller looked from the shrapnel to O'Malley's desperate, haunted eyes. He was a man of ledgers, of numbers and manifests, but this was an equation he couldn't solve. When does a human life start to outweigh a military order? "Jack, I can't," Miller whispered, tormented. "You owe me $50, O'Malley said, his voice soft. "This is the $50. Just look the other way." He saw the keys on Miller's desk hanging from a hook, the medical lockbox. Before Miller could protest, O'Malley brushed past him, unlocked the box, and his hand found the small, cold ampule in the cotton batting. He took one. "You were never here," Miller said to his back, his voice shaking. "I never saw you. Your debt is paid, Brooklyn. Now get the hell out." O'Malley ran. He didn't just walk. He ran, his boots sucking at the mud, the tiny glass vial a sun in his fist. He passed the command tent. The flap was open, and in the opening a silhouette, Captain Davies, holding a tin mug, watching him. Davies didn't move. He didn't shout. He just watched O'Malley run from the supply depot and to the medical tent. The silence was louder than an accusation. O'Malley didn't stop. He burst back into the medical tent. Hanako was convulsing, her head snapping back and forth. A thin, rattling foam was on her lips. Clara was bathing her head, her face a mask of grim defeat. "She's crashing," Clara said, not looking up. "The septicemia is in her brain. We're losing her." O'Malley grabbed her arm, his fingers digging in. He shoved the ampule into her hand. "You're not." Clara looked at the vial. Her eyes went wide with a mixture of terror and awe. "How? Jack, where did you—" "Just use it," he yelled. "Just use it now." Clara became a machine. She didn't ask another question. This was her line, her moral event horizon. She was a nurse. She had medicine. She had a patient. The rest was just noise. She snapped the ampule, drew the precious pale gold liquid into a syringe, and found a vein in Hanako's thin arm. The needle went in. Clara pushed the plunger, sending the life's work of Alexander Fleming into the bloodstream of an enemy girl on a forgotten island. The tent was silent. The rattling in Hanako's chest didn't stop, but it changed. The violent convulsions eased into a deep, profound tremor. Clara put her fingers on Hanako's neck. "It's in," Clara whispered, her hands shaking. "Now we pray." She looked at Jack. "And you, PFC O'Malley, had better start praying for yourself. You know Captain Davies was watching you." Before O'Malley could answer, the tent flap was ripped open. Captain Davies stood there. He wasn't enraged. He was calm, which was infinitely more terrifying. His eyes took in the scene. Clara, the syringe still in her hand. O'Malley standing over the cot like a guilty sentinel. And Hanako now sweating profusely, the fever beginning to break. His gaze fell on the metal tray. He saw the empty ampule. Next to it he saw the jagged piece of American shrapnel. "PFC O'Malley," Davies said, his voice a quiet rumble. "Sir," O'Malley snapped to attention, a caricature of a soldier. Davies walked slowly into the tent. He didn't look at O'Malley. He looked at the girl. He watched her for a long, silent moment. Then he looked at Nurse Goldstein. "Nurse," he said, "I've developed a rather persistent cough. I believe I was scheduled for a dose of penicillin this morning." Clara's blood ran cold. "Sir, there was an emergency. A critical patient." "I see that," Davies said, his eyes flicking to Hanako. He walked to the tray. He picked up the piece of shrapnel, weighed it in his hand, and looked at the U.S. Navy markings etched into its side. "A complication." He set the metal down with a click. He turned back to O'Malley. The silence in the tent was absolute. O'Malley's career was over. He knew it. "I don't need the medicine, nurse," Davies said, rubbing the back of his neck. "My cough seems to have cleared up." O'Malley felt a rush of relief so profound his knees almost buckled, but the captain wasn't finished. "However," Davies said, his eyes locking on O'Malley, "Specialist Miller's inventory is now incorrect. A serious breach of protocol, and you, Private, were seen 50 yards off your patrol route in a restricted area, fraternizing with an internee." The relief vanished. This was a new, worse accusation. "You will report to my tent at 600, O'Malley, in 1 hour," Davies said. "You will bring your M1 clean, and you will explain to me in detail what exactly you are doing, playing savior to the enemy, while we are still at war." He turned and left. Clara checked Hanako's pulse. A small, weak smile touched her lips. "It's strong. It's steady. The fever broke." She looked at Jack. "You saved her." O'Malley stared at the tent flap where the captain had disappeared. He had won the battle for Hanako's life. But he had just walked into an entirely new war, and he was completely unarmed. He had saved her from the shrapnel, but who would save him from the consequences? The grey, humid light of OR-600 filtered into Captain Davies' command tent, illuminating a world of canvas walls and stacked ammo crates. PFC O'Malley stood at rigid, terrified attention, his M1 rifle, which he had obsessively cleaned, held at his side. His uniform was still damp with Hanako's fever sweat. He smelled of mud, fear, and carbolic acid. Captain Davies was not at his desk. He was standing, looking at a map of Okinawa, a tin mug of coffee in his hand. The tent was silent save for the drip of condensation. On the desk, between a field radio and a .45 pistol, sat the kidney dish. Inside it the piece of American shrapnel. "You know the Uniform Code of Military Justice, Private?" Davies asked, not turning around. "Sir, yes, sir." "You know the penalty for willful theft of medical supplies in a combat zone?" "Sir, yes, sir, a general court-martial." "And for fraternization with an enemy internee, which is what this is, O'Malley. Don't fool yourself." O'Malley's blood ran cold. He said nothing. There was nothing to say. Davies finally turned. He was a man in his 40s, with lines of exhaustion so deep they looked like scars. He wasn't angry. He was something far worse. He was calculating. "You think you're a hero, Private?" Davies asked, his voice quiet. "You think you just saved a life?" "No, sir. You just compromised my command," Davies said, stepping toward him. "You just put Nurse Goldstein in an impossible position. You just stole from your fellow soldiers. Specialist Miller is already under arrest." O'Malley's stomach dropped. "Sir, it was me. I forced him. He—" "Quiet," Davies snapped. O'Malley snapped his jaw shut. Davies stared at him, a long, appraising look. "Do you have any idea what we are doing here, O'Malley? Do you think this is about winning a battle? The battle is over. This," he waved his hand at the camp beyond the tent flap, "is about winning the war. We are preparing for the invasion of the mainland, Operation Downfall. President Truman is demanding it, and Imperial General Headquarters is preparing to sacrifice every man, woman, and child to stop us. They believe we are devils." He walked to the desk and picked up the bloody piece of shrapnel. He held it in front of O'Malley's face. "This is a piece of a U.S. Navy 5-inch shell. Our propaganda tells them we are here to save them. Our shells tell them otherwise. That girl, Hanako Tanaka, if she had died of a septic, U.S.-made wound, after we had processed her, what do you think that story does? It spreads through this camp like typhus. It confirms every lie the Imperial Army told them. It's not one dead girl, O'Malley. It's 1,000 more civilians jumping off cliffs in Kyushu. It's 10,000 more GIs dead on a beach because the local populace would rather die than surrender to the butchers." O'Malley's mind struggled to grasp the scale of what Davies was saying. He hadn't been saving GA girl. "You didn't follow the rules, Private," Davies said, his voice a low growl. "But you accidentally followed the mission. You stopped a rumor that could have cost me this entire camp. You proved the propaganda. Right." He tossed the shrapnel. It clattered back into the dish. "I can't have a thief in my supply chain," Davies said. "Specialist Miller's confession states he misplaced an ampule during a supply transfer. A tragic, punishable error. He'll be on latrine duty for a month." O'Malley blinked, processing the lie. Davies had just saved Miller. "And I can't have a guard who plays favorites," Davies continued. "You're off patrol. Effective immediately. You're reassigned. You will report to Nurse Goldstein. You are now her personal orderly. You will haul water, you will burn excrement, you will hold down the sick, and you will clean up the dead. You will not have a rifle, you will have a bucket. You will save all of them, O'Malley, not just the one who makes you feel good. Is that clear?" Relief and shame washed over O'Malley in a disorienting wave. "Sir, yes, sir." "Get out of my sight." From the Diary of Nurse Clara Goldstein. July 15th, 1945. The war has changed for me, and for PFC O'Malley. He's not a soldier anymore. He's my arms and legs. He's a pariah to the other GIs. They call him the Emperor's orderly, but he doesn't seem to care. He works 18 hours a day. He's learned to say "it doesn't hurt" in Japanese. He's learned to see the human being behind the shaved head and the empty stare. The camp is still a nightmare of dysentery and malnutrition, but we're holding. We are holding. Hanako Tanaka is the miracle. She recovered. The penicillin, a literal gift from God and a court-martial private, worked. She is a light. She's weak, but she started helping in the tent, translating, calming the other women, showing them how to eat the sea-ration cheese. She and O'Malley, they have a language. It's not English, it's not Japanese. It's a language of silence. A nod. The passing of a clean bandage. He saved her life. Now she is helping him save his soul. The final week of July was a hot, breathless purgatory. O'Malley, his uniform permanently stained, was emptying a waste bucket when he saw Hanako sitting outside the medical tent. Her hair had started to grow back, a soft dark fuzz. She was thin, but her eyes were clear. She watched him. He stopped awkward, holding the foul bucket. The cultural chasm was still there. He was a man, she an unmarried woman. He was the enemy, she the vanquished. He had held her down, he had saved her. Neither of them had the words for this complex, terrible, and beautiful thing. He nodded. "Ma'am." She nodded back. Then she did something that stopped him cold. She put her hand to her side, where the wound had been. Then she put her hand to his arm, just for a second, a light, impossible touch, a reenactment. When she had gasped, "Please, touch, here," it was a plea born of agony so profound it shattered all custom. It was the desperate cry of a human being in pain, reaching for any other human. Now she repeated the gesture, but this time it was not a plea. It was a statement. "You touched this. You saved this." She bowed her head. "Arigato." O'Malley felt the knot in his chest, the one he'd carried since the Clippers, finally loosen. He just nodded, unable to speak, and carried the bucket away. The war ended a few weeks later. The mushroom clouds over Hiroshima and Nagasaki were just rumors, impossible stories that filtered into the camp. Then the Emperor's voice on the radio. It was over. O'Malley was on a truck, being rotated out. The GIs were celebrating, shooting flares, drunk on the fact that they would not, after all, have to invade the mainland. The camp was in a state of stunned, silent chaos. He looked for her. He saw a small figure by the medical tent, watching the trucks leave. Hanako. Their eyes met across the yard. 100 yards of mud and history. He couldn't go to her. She couldn't come to him. She watched him, her face unreadable. Then slowly she bowed. A deep, formal bow, not of submission, but of profound, equal respect. O'Malley, a 19-year-old kid from Brooklyn who had seen the end of the world, felt his throat close. He raised a hand in a clumsy, awkward wave. As the truck rumbled out of the gate, he found a small, folded piece of rice paper in his pocket. A child must have slipped it to him. He opened it. It was a charcoal sketch, done with a burnt stick. It wasn't a portrait of him. It was a drawing of his hands, large and dirty, carefully picking her family photograph out of the mud, the first act, the moment the devil became a man. He clutched the paper, the only proof he had that any of it had meant anything, as the truck headed for the harbor, leaving the island of ash and silence behind.